My name is Claire Donovan, and for 6 long years I was a shadow in my own home, a full-time housewife and unpaid caregiver. Before that, I had a promising career in marketing, a life buzzing with potential. The moment I found out what my silence and compliance truly cost me, not just in dollars, but in my soul, everything shattered. They thought I'd just keep taking it, keep smiling, keep absorbing the blows to my spirit. They had no idea that the quiet woman they exploited was meticulously noting every slight, every injustice, every stolen piece of her life. There are so many truths about what happened in that house, so many layers to the betrayal, and the path to my freedom was paved with an unimaginable tragedy. I remember standing in a brightly lit pharmacy, my sick child limp in my arms, my heart pounding, not from fear for her fever, but from the ice-cold dread of knowing I couldn't even afford the medicine to make her better. That was the first crack in the dam. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if your sacrifices have been met with indifference or worse, contempt, if you've ever been made to feel small, so someone else could feel big then, comment and subscribe, because you are not alone. Trust me, if you're someone who has ever been underestimated, taken for granted, or fought for your own worth against the odds, this story will change how you see family money and the silent, ferocious power of a woman pushed too far forever. My story with Richard didn't begin with shackles and a ledger. It started, as many do, with a whirlwind of charm and promises. I met him when I was 26, a vibrant marketing executive, climbing the ladder, passionate about campaigns and strategy. Richard was older, established in finance, and exuded an air of worldly confidence that I, still finding my footing, found intoxicating. He pursued me with a single-minded intensity that felt like adoration. He loved my ambition, or so he said. "You're going to take over the world, Claire," he'd whisper, and I'd blush, believing him. We married within 2 years. Our daughter Emily arrived a year later, a perfect tiny miracle who became the sun in my universe. Life felt golden full. I juggled motherhood and my career, admittedly with difficulty, but I was determined. Richard was supportive then, or at least he paid lip service to it. "Whatever you need, babe," was his common refrain, though the actual doing often fell short. My own childhood hadn't prepared me for the subtle erosion of self that was to come. I grew up in a busy, somewhat chaotic household with 2 older brothers. My parents, while loving, were often overwhelmed. I was the quiet one, the good girl, the one who didn't make waves. My achievements were acknowledged with a nod, while my brothers' far lesser accomplishments were often met with fanfare. I learned early to be self-sufficient, to rely on my own internal compass, because external validation was a scarce commodity. This perhaps made me susceptible to Richard's initial overwhelming attentiveness. It was a stark contrast to what I was used to. I craved that feeling of being truly seen, and for a while, Richard provided it. My talent even then was in observation and quiet planning skills I'd later use for something far different than marketing campaigns. The shift began about 6 years ago when Richard's mother, Martha, suffered a debilitating stroke. She was left wheelchair-bound, her once formidable physical presence diminished, but her tongue, always sharp, seemed to have been honed to a razor's edge by her immobility and bitterness. Richard was her only child, and the responsibility he declared fell to us. "Claire, darling." He'd set his arm around me, his voice a practiced symphony of concern and gentle persuasion. "She needs full-time care. We can't afford a high-end facility, not the kind she deserves, and I can't bear the thought of her with strangers." His eyes so earnest. "You're so good with people, so caring. And you've been wanting to spend more time with Emily anyway, right? This could be a blessing in disguise." A blessing. I remember the word catching in my throat. I loved my job. I was on the cusp of a major promotion. But Emily was only 4, and the guilt of long hours at the office was a constant low hum. And Martha, well, Martha was Richard's mother. "I don't know Richard." I'd said, "I'm not a nurse. And my career—" "Your career can wait," he'd soothed. "This is temporary. Just until she's a bit more recovered, more independent." And financially, don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing. My entire salary will be yours. Our money is your money. You'll manage the household care for Mom raise Emily. You'll be the queen of this castle." Queen of the castle. It sounded grand. The reality was a slow descent into servitude. Initially, he was true to his word about the finances. His salary went into our joint account, and I managed everything. But Martha didn't recover more independence. She reveled in her dependence and having me at her beck and call. Her critiques were relentless. "The tea is too weak, Claire. Did you even dust this room properly? Richard tells me you used to be quite the go-getter. Pity you let all that ambition go to waste. Though looking at you now, perhaps it's for the best." These barbs were often delivered with a saccharine smile if Richard was present, or a venomous hiss if he wasn't. Richard, bless his selective hearing, rarely intervened. "She's been through a lot, Claire. Just be patient," he'd say, already retreating behind his newspaper or laptop. Over the first year, the joint account access subtly changed. First, he suggested a separate household allowance account for simplicity. It was a generous amount initially. Then, about a year after I quit my job, he announced a temporary belt tightening due to some vague market fluctuations. The allowance shrunk. A year later, another reduction. "Just being prudent, darling." My protests were met with sighs and lectures about an ungrateful attitude. By the time Emily was 10 and I had been Martha's caregiver for 6 years, that generous allowance had dwindled to a pathetic $1,500 a month. From this, I was expected to buy all the groceries for 3 adults and a growing child, Emily's clothes and school supplies, any household necessities, my own toiletries, Martha's specific dietary supplements and over-the-counter aids, and any small out-of-pocket medical expenses. It was an impossible sum. Richard paid the mortgage, utilities, and his own car payments directly. Everything else was my domain. My marketing brain, unused for so long in its professional capacity, would do frantic calculations stretching every dollar until it screamed. I remember one specific incident about 2 years in. Emily needed new winter boots. Her old ones were pinching her toes. I mentioned it to Richard, showing him the worn soles. "Can't you find some on sale, Claire, or maybe patch those up? She grows so fast anyway." This from a man who just bought himself a $500 watch. I ended up finding a pair at a consignment shop, my cheeks burning with shame as I paid. Martha, of course, had noticed Emily's slightly shabby footwear. "Can't you afford proper shoes for the child, Claire, or are you spending Richard's hard-earned money on frivolous things for yourself?" I had bought myself nothing new in over a year. Another time, Martha demanded a specific expensive brand of imported biscuits. The allowance was already stretched thin. I bought a similar, less expensive local brand. The ensuing tirade lasted an hour, culminating in her throwing the packet across the room. "Is this how you treat me? With cheap substitutes? Richard? Richard, come see how your wife neglects me." Richard's response, after I tearfully explained, was, "Claire, for God's sake, just buy her the damn biscuits. It's not that much money." But it was that much money when you only had so little to begin with, and he refused to increase the base amount. My potential, my talents were not just ignored, they were actively suppressed. Any suggestion I made about managing family finances more efficiently, or even seeking part-time remote work, was met with Richard's firm, "Your job is here, Claire, with Mother and Emily. That's what we agreed." Martha would chime in, "A woman's place is in the home, dear, especially one who isn't particularly good at anything else." The frustration was a constant simmering pot. I felt like a pressure cooker, the valve slowly tightening. The woman I once was confident, articulate, valued was a distant memory, a ghost haunting the hallways of my meticulously cleaned but emotionally barren home. I was becoming an expert in economizing and caregiving and absorbing insults, but none of these skills paid a wage or earned a shred of genuine respect. They just became expectations. The years settled into a grim, repeating pattern of disappointment and devaluation. It wasn't just the big things. It was the relentless drip, drip, drip of daily slights that eroded my sense of self. Each milestone moment for our family became another opportunity for me to be overlooked for my contributions, to be rendered invisible. Emily's birthdays were a particular source of pain. I'd spend weeks planning, trying to create magic on a shoestring budget. One year, for her 7th birthday, she desperately wanted a particular type of themed party. I stayed up late for nights on end, hand-making decorations, baking the cake myself from scratch, because a store-bought one was an extravagance. Richard barely registered the effort, arriving late from work, offering a cursory, "Looks nice, Claire," before retreating to his study. Martha, propped in her chair like a malevolent queen, found fault with everything. "The cake is a bit dry, isn't it?" she'd remark loudly to one of the few relatives who bothered to visit. "And these decorations, rather amateurish. You get what you pay for, I suppose. Or, in this case, what you don't pay for." My heart would clench, but I'd force a smile for Emily's sake. Our wedding anniversaries, once celebrated with dinners out and thoughtful gifts, became non-events. The year I turned 35 in age, I'd once imagined celebrating with a significant career achievement under my belt. Richard forgot entirely until I prompted him late in the evening. His apology was perfunctory. "Oh, right, sorry, Claire, been swamped at work. We'll do something sometime." We never did. Martha, however, remembered. 35 are you, my. Time does fly when you're doing whatever it is you do all day. Academically, I had excelled. I had a first-class honors degree in marketing. In my early career, I'd won a prestigious award for a campaign I'd spearheaded. These achievements were now ancient history artifacts from a forgotten civilization. When a former colleague once mentioned my award at a rare social gathering we attended, Richard had laughed, "Oh, Claire's far too busy with domestic duties for that kind of thing now. Aren't you, darling?" He patted my hand dismissively, as if my past accomplishments were cute juvenile endeavors. Martha would add her usual poison. "Intellectual pursuits are wasted on some. Better to stick to what one knows or what one is told." The contrast with how any minor effort from Richard was treated was stark. If he changed a light bulb, he was lauded by Martha as so handy, so capable. If he spent an hour playing with Emily, he was Father of the Year. My 16-hour days of cooking, cleaning, nursing, scheduling, budgeting, and emotionally supporting everyone were just expected. The baseline. My internal monologue during these years became a torrent of frustration and a slow dawning horror at what my life had become. Is this it? Is this all I am now? A cook, a cleaner, a nurse, a punching bag. When did I agree to this erasure of myself? He promised. He promised he would take care of me, that we were partners. This isn't a partnership. It's a dictatorship, dressed up as a family. I'd look at my reflection sometimes, seeing the tired eyes, the lines of stress that hadn't been there before, and barely recognize the woman staring back. One particularly telling dialogue scene occurred about a year before Emily's illness. The washing machine had finally given up the ghost, shuddering to a clanking halt mid-cycle. "Richard," I said that evening, careful to keep my voice neutral, "the washing machine is broken. We need a new one." He barely looked up from his tablet. "Can it be fixed?" "I don't think so. It's very old and it was making terrible noises." The repairman quoted almost as much as a new basic model just to look at it. "Well, that's inconvenient." He sighed, as if I'd deliberately broken it. "Money is tight this month, Claire. Can you manage with hand washing for a bit?" My jaw dropped. Hand washing, Richard, I do at least 2 loads a day. Emily's clothes, your work shirts, Martha's bedding, which needs frequent changing. It's not feasible. "Make it feasible," he said, his voice hardening. "You're home all day. Figure it out. It's not like you don't have the time." The callousness of it stunned me. "And what about the money for a new one eventually?" "We'll see. Maybe next month, or the month after. Stop catastrophizing." Martha from her throne in the living room called out, "In my day, we didn't have all these fancy gadgets. A bit of hard work never hurt anyone. Builds character. Something some people around here sorely lack." I remember walking away, a cold fury building in my chest. I ended up finding a used one online from a family moving away, paying for it with the last dregs of what used to be my personal emergency savings from before my marriage money I'd squirreled away from freelance projects I'd done years ago. I didn't tell him. Another time, Martha was particularly vicious. I'd made her favorite shepherd's pie, taking extra care to ensure the meat was tender and the potatoes perfectly fluffy. "This is edible," she conceded, poking at it with her fork. "Barely. You know, Richard's first wife, bless her departed soul, made a shepherd's pie that was poetry. Pure poetry." Richard had never been married before. It was a deliberate, cruel invention designed to wound. "Martha Richard wasn't married before me," I said quietly, my cheeks flushing. "Oh, wasn't he? My memory isn't what it was." She gave a sly smile. "Or perhaps some things are best forgotten, like mediocre cooking." I looked at Richard, pleading with my eyes for him to intervene to defend me. He just shrugged, a small, uncomfortable twitch of his lips. "Mom, be nice." It was a token effort devoid of any real force. He then changed the subject, asking Martha about a television program she enjoyed. My contribution, my effort, was once again dismissed, my feelings irrelevant. The only bright spot was Emily. She was a kind, observant child, and sometimes, in her innocent way, she'd validate me more than any adult in the house. "Mommy, you make the best cookies," she'd say, her hug fierce. Or, "Grandma is grumpy today, but your stories are much better than her TV shows." These small moments were lifelines. I had a few old friends I kept in touch with via infrequent emails or texts. Sarah, my closest friend from my marketing days, now a director at a major firm, would sometimes call. "Claire, are you happy?" she'd ask, her voice laced with concern. I'd always deflect. "Of course, busy with Emily and Martha. You know how it is." I was too ashamed to admit the truth, to confess how far I'd fallen from the ambitious woman she once knew. I didn't want her pity. The most recent major disappointment, just weeks before Emily got sick, was Richard's unilateral decision to cancel our planned budget summer trip to a nearby lake cabin, something Emily had been looking forward to for months. His excuse: a vital investment opportunity came up, had to divert the funds. He'd then spent a weekend on a business golf retreat that I knew cost more than our entire cabin rental would have. Emily had cried, and I'd held her, my own heart a leaden weight of resentment. That cancellation, that blatant prioritization of his wants over our family's needs, felt like a turning point, a sharpening of the edges of my discontent. Little did I know the real breaking point was just around the corner, waiting to detonate the carefully constructed facade of my life. The ordinary Tuesday morning, when Emily woke up with a dry, hacking cough and a feverish flush to her cheeks, felt like any other challenging day, just with an added layer of maternal worry. I gave her some children's ibuprofen I had squirreled away, coaxed some fluids into her, and kept her close on the sofa, hoping it was just a 24-hour bug. Martha from her armchair offered her usual unhelpful commentary. "She's probably caught something from that dreadful school, always bringing germs into the house. In my day, children were hardier." By late afternoon, Emily's fever had spiked to 103°. The cough was harsher, rattling in her small chest, and she was listless, her usual bright spark dimmed. My maternal alarm bells, usually a reliable gauge, were clanging frantically. This was wave one of the conflict that would unravel everything, the dawning realization that this wasn't a simple cold. I tried calling Richard at his office. "He's in a meeting," his secretary chirped, her voice professionally brisk. "Can I take a message?" "It's urgent," I said, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "It's about Emily. She's very unwell." "I'll let him know when he's free, Mrs. Donovan." He never called back. As evening approached, Emily started wheezing. Each breath was a struggle. That was wave two, the undeniable need for medical intervention. I bundled her up, my heart hammering against my ribs, and called a taxi. Richard always had our only car. The emergency room was a cacophony of beeping machines, hushed, anxious voices, and the sterile smell of antiseptic. We waited for what felt like an eternity, Emily curled weakly against me. I felt so utterly alone, a solitary warrior fighting a battle no one else seemed to see or care about. Finally, a kind but overworked doctor examined her, listened to her chest, and diagnosed a nasty bout of bronchitis bordering on pneumonia. She needs antibiotics immediately and possibly a nebulizer treatment if her breathing doesn't improve with the medication, he said, scribbling on a prescription pad. Wave 3 hit me at the hospital pharmacy. The pharmacist, a young woman with tired eyes, rang up the medications, a strong antibiotic, an inhaler, and a syrup to ease the cough. "That will be $187.50, she said. My blood ran cold. I opened my wallet. Inside there was $43 and some change, the dregs of the monthly $1,500 after groceries, and an unexpected school expense for Emily. My debit card linked to that same rapidly depleting allowance account would surely be declined or leave me with virtually nothing for the rest of the month. A fresh wave of panic, sharp and sickening, washed over me. I had to call Richard. There was no other option. Standing to one side, Emily whimpering softly in my arms, I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, his voice sharp, impatient. "What is it, Claire? I'm busy." "Richard, it's Emily. We're at the hospital pharmacy. The doctor said she has severe bronchitis, possibly pneumonia. She needs medication, and it's $187.50. I don't have enough." There was a pause, then an exasperated sigh that I knew so well. $187 for what are you sure you even needed to take her to the ER? You always overreact. Can't you just give her some Calpol or something? Tears pricked my eyes. "Richard, she was wheezing. The doctor said it's serious. Please, I just need the money for the prescription." "Figure it out, Claire." He snapped, his voice laced with cold anger. "It's always something with you, always more money. I give you a perfectly adequate allowance. Learn to budget better." And then the click. He hung up. That was wave 4, the final crushing blow. Standing there, my desperately sick child in my arms, an unpaid bill for life-saving medicine in my hand, and his cruel, dismissive words echoing in my ears. Something inside me irrevocably broke. The humiliation was a physical pain, a burning shame that spread through my chest. But beneath it, a different emotion began to stir, a cold, hard rage. He hadn't just refused the money. He'd belittled my concern, invalidated my judgment, and effectively abandoned his child in a moment of need. It was in that sterile, indifferent pharmacy under the buzzing fluorescent lights that the full, unvarnished truth hit me with the force of a physical assault. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't even a respected employee. I was an unpaid worker, a drudge, a convenience he could control with purse strings and disdain. The realization was so stark, so brutal, it literally took my breath away. My entire identity as his wife, as a valued member of my own family, crumbled. A flashback, vivid and mocking, played in my mind, Richard years ago, his face earnest, his eyes shining with sincerity. "You'll never have to worry about money, darling. I'll take care of everything. My salary is your salary. You just focus on Mom and the house. You'll be the queen of this castle." The bitter irony of those words now tasted like ash in my mouth. Queen of a prison more like. Tears streamed down my face, hot and furious. But these weren't just tears of despair. They were tears of transformation. The fear was still there, but it was being rapidly consumed by a burgeoning steel-cord resolve. The Claire who had meekly accepted her lot, who had tried to stretch pennies and apologies to cover gaping wounds of neglect, was gone. She had died in that pharmacy right next to the cough drops and antacids. I looked at Emily, her small face pale, her breathing still labored. My child. His child. He would not do this to her. He would not do this to me anymore. The stakes were no longer just about my dignity or happiness. They were about my daughter's well-being, her future, and my ability to protect her. He had shown his true colors, and they were ugly and mean. I fished out my almost-forgotten credit card, one I'd kept from my working days, with a small emergency limit I'd painstakingly paid down and preserved for a true crisis. This was it. I paid for the medication, my hand trembling slightly as I signed the slip. The debt incurred was a small price for the clarity I'd just gained. As I walked out of the pharmacy and into the cool night air, cradling Emily and the precious bag of medicines, I wasn't just walking away from a building. I was walking away from a life. What I didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the storm. Little did Richard or Martha know the quiet woman they'd dismissed for so long was about to find her voice, and it would roar. Life has its own way of balancing the scales, and the universe was already recalibrating. Behind their smug assumptions, a reckoning was waiting to surface. Standing there on the pavement, waiting for another taxi I could barely afford, I knew one thing with chilling certainty: the Claire. They knew the one they had so carelessly broken was gone, and they had no idea what was coming for them. The taxi ride home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Emily, finally soothed by the first dose of medicine administered right there in the pharmacy waiting area, had fallen into an exhausted sleep against my shoulder. My arm was numb, but my mind was preternaturally clear, buzzing with a cold, hard anger and an equally potent sense of purpose. The truth bomb wasn't a single explosive discovery from an external source. It was an internal detonation, a profound and absolute shift in my own perception forged in the crucible of that pharmacy humiliation. The major secret, if you could call it that, was the one I had kept from myself for 6 long years: the quantifiable monetary value of my own servitude. Richard's parting shot, "Learn to budget better," echoed in my mind not as an insult anymore, but as an inadvertent challenge. Oh, I would budget all right. I would calculate everything. Once Emily was settled in her bed, breathing a little easier, I didn't go to my own. Instead, I went to the small, cluttered desk in the corner of our living room where I managed the household accounts. But tonight, I wasn't just tallying grocery receipts. I pulled out a fresh notepad and a pen. For the next few hours, fueled by a potent cocktail of fury and adrenaline, I meticulously listed every task I performed daily, weekly, monthly. Childcare for Emily, after-school supervision homework, help emotional support, meal prep specific to her needs, chauffeuring if I'd had a car, average rate for a nanny, at least 25 hour. Nursing care for Martha, medication management assistance with bathing and dressing, meal preparation for her specific dietary needs, companionship even if unwanted, managing her appointments, dealing with her incontinence, turning her to prevent bed sores, rate for a home health aide or practical nurse, easily 25, 35 hour more for specialized tasks, housekeeping, cleaning, a multi-room apartment, daily laundry for 3 people, deep cleaning. Rate for a professional cleaner, 30 fee hour. Cooking, 3 meals a day plus snacks menu. Planning grocery shopping. Private chef, cook rate. Even a modest estimate was significant. Administrative financial management bill. Payment from the meager allowance budget contortion appointment. Scheduling for the entire household. Personal assistant rate 25 plus hour. I assigned conservative hourly rates to each category, then multiplied by the hours. I was conservative, underestimating if anything. Even so, the numbers climbing on the page were staggering. I worked on average a 16-hour day, 7 days a week. There were no sick days, no vacation time. If I was ill, I worked through it. The final figure when I calculated a monthly salary based on these market rates was well over $10,000. $10,000 a month, and Richard had been giving me $1,500 from which I was also supposed to feed and clothe his child and cater to his mother. The realization hit me like a freight train loaded with years of pain and suppressed anger. I wasn't just being undervalued, I was being actively, systematically, and massively exploited. This wasn't financial prudence on Richard's part. This was theft. Theft of my time, my labor, my skills, my earning potential, my self-respect. Martha wasn't just a cranky old lady. She was his willing accomplice, the enforcer who ensured my compliance through constant psychological warfare. My heart didn't just break for the life I was living. It shattered into 1,000 pieces for the woman I had allowed myself to become. The ambitious, capable marketing professional was buried under layers of domestic drudgery and emotional abuse. But as I stared at those figures, something else rose from the ashes of that shattered self, an ice-cold, diamond-hard determination. My internal monologue shifted from victimhood to agency. They didn't break me. I allowed myself to be broken, and now I am taking myself back. Every single piece. I am not asking anymore. I am done asking. I am informing. I am invoicing. And then I am leaving. The game had changed because I was changing the rules. My decision to take action crystallized with absolute clarity. I would present my invoice to Richard and Martha, not as a plea but as a statement of fact. I would outline my terms for any continued presence in that house, proper remuneration, respect, and an end to the abuse. I knew realistically they would never agree, which led to point 2. I would inform them that my services as Martha's caregiver were terminated effective immediately, and my role as Richard's domestic servant was also over. I would take Emily and leave, but not before making it clear that Richard now bore full responsibility for his daughter and his mother. Taking Emily to his office was no longer a vague idea. It was a tactical necessity. I would re-enter the workforce. My marketing skills were rusty, but caregiving, I was now an expert, albeit an unwilling one. I would leverage that. The planning and preparation phase began before dawn. I found the file containing my old resume. It felt alien, like a relic from another life. I started updating it, focusing on the transferable skills. I'd honed management, logistics, budgeting, under extreme pressure, conflict resolution, even if it was mostly me resolving to absorb conflict, and of course, elder care and childcare. Then I went online. I searched for domestic staffing agencies and live-in caregiver positions. My marketing brain, dormant for so long, clicked back into gear. I knew how to present myself, how to highlight my unpaid experience. I drafted a cover letter, professional and concise. By 6 a.m., I had emailed my resume to 3 agencies and scheduled a call with one for later that morning. I packed a small overnight bag for Emily and myself, a change of clothes, toiletries, Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit, my laptop, the notepad with my calculations, and my small stash of emergency cash, and the credit card. I felt a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes after a violent storm when the air is clear and sharp. The anticipation for the confrontation wasn't fear. It was a grim sort of eagerness. I was no longer a character in their story. I was the author of my own. And the next chapter was going to be a plot twist they'd never see coming. I looked at my reflection in the dim morning light. The tired eyes were still there, but now they held a new glint, not of tears, but of fire. The truth in all its brutal clarity hadn't just set me free. It had armed me. The dinner confrontation was set for that very evening. I spent the day operating on autopilot, caring for Emily, who was thankfully much improved with the antibiotics, and tending to Martha's needs with a detached efficiency that unnerved her. "You're very quiet today, Claire," Martha observed suspiciously during her lunchtime soup. "Plotting something, are we?" "If only you knew," I thought, offering a bland smile. As I served dinner, a simple roast chicken I'd cooked ironically to perfection, the tension in the small dining room was thick enough to carve. Richard was still surly from my unnecessary ER visit and the subsequent pharmacy call. Martha was watchful. Emily, sensing the undercurrents, was quiet. I waited until they were halfway through their meal. Then I placed my notepad open to the page with my calculations in the center of the table. "Richard, Martha," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, devoid of the tremor I'd expected. "We need to discuss my employment terms." Richard choked on a piece of chicken. "What, Claire? Have you lost your mind?" "My employment terms," I repeated calmly. "For the past 6 years, I have worked as a full-time caregiver for Martha, a full-time childcare provider for Emily, a housekeeper, a cook, and a household manager. Based on conservative industry rates for these services, working an average of 112 hours per week, my calculated monthly salary should be approximately $10,800. I slid the notepad towards Richard. "That's my invoice for services rendered, services you, Richard, promised would be fully compensated when you asked me to give up my career." Richard stared at the notepad, his face turning a mottled red. This is outrageous. You're my wife. This is your family." "A wife is a partner. Richard, not an unpaid employee. A family supports each other, not exploits one member for the comfort of others. Martha slammed her fork down. Ungrateful wretch. After we took you in, gave you a home food on your table, how dare you? The food I cooked. Martha, I corrected my gaze, unwavering. In the home I cleaned. With the pittance Richard allocated from our supposed joint income, an income I haven't had true access to in years. The $1,500 a month doesn't even begin to cover the expenses, let alone compensate me for my labor. I continued. So here are my terms for continued service. Firstly, full back pay for the last 6 years, which amounts to roughly $706 minus the allowances already paid. Secondly, a contracted monthly salary of $10,800 moving forward, paid into my own separate bank account. Thirdly, clearly defined working hours, weekends off, and paid vacation time. And fourthly, and most importantly, an immediate cessation of all verbal abuse and a modicum of respect. Silence. Richard looked like he was about to have an apoplexy. Martha's face was a mask of fury. You are certifiably insane, Richard finally sputtered. This is blackmail. This is ludicrous. It's the value of my work, Richard, I said. Work you clearly don't appreciate. Therefore, as you are obviously unwilling to meet these terms, I am formally resigning from my position as Martha's caregiver and your household manager, effective immediately. You can't do that, Martha shrieked. Who will look after me? Richard will, I said, turning to him, or he can hire someone. With the money he'll be saving on my allowance. I stood up. I've packed a bag for Emily and myself. We'll be staying elsewhere tonight. You are not taking my daughter, Richard roared, lunging to his feet. Our daughter, Richard, I said, my voice like ice. And I am certainly not leaving her in this toxic environment with a father who wouldn't even pay for her medicine last night. That hit home. His face paled. I turned and walked out of the dining room, Emily's small hand instinctively finding mine as I passed her. She looked scared, but also resolute. The next morning, after a restless night at a budget hotel, I executed Phase 2. I took Emily to Richard's gleaming downtown office building. The receptionist, a polished young woman, looked surprised to see me with a child. Mr. Donovan is in a meeting, she said, almost a reflex. He can be interrupted. I stated, not rudely, but with an undeniable air of authority. I walked past her towards his glass-walled office, Emily trotting to keep up. Richard was indeed in a meeting with 2 other men in suits. He looked up, saw me, and his face contorted with rage. He excused himself abruptly and met me just outside his office door, his voice a furious whisper. What in God's name are you doing here, Claire, and why have you brought Emily? Several of his colleagues were now openly staring. The power dynamic had subtly shifted. This was his turf, but I had brought the unsavory reality of his home life into his pristine professional world. Good morning, Richard, I said calmly. As I resigned last night, my caregiving duties for Emily are also concluded. She is your daughter. It's your turn to look after her. I have appointments to get to. I gave Emily a reassuring hug. Be good, sweetie. Daddy will take care of you. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving a stunned, sputtering Richard with his equally stunned colleagues and his bewildered daughter. The image of his public humiliation was a small, bitter satisfaction. My appointment was with the domestic staffing agency. I aced the interview. My past marketing experience combined with my detailed, albeit informal caregiving record impressed the manager. You're exactly what many of our clients are looking for, Ms. Donovan, she said. Experience, maturity, and a professional demeanor. She lined up 2 interviews for high-paying live-in positions for the following week. For the first time in years, a flicker of my old confidence returned. Later that afternoon, I arranged to go back to the apartment to collect more of Emily's things and some of my personal belongings. I'd called Richard to ensure he and Emily would be there so I could see her, but also so he'd be present for what I knew would be Martha's inevitable eruption. I timed it for when he was likely to be home from his disastrous day at the office. As my taxi pulled up, I saw Richard's car already parked outside. I paid the driver and got out, steeling myself. As I approached the walkway to our apartment building, I heard her before I saw her. "There she is, the ungrateful, home-wrecking bitch." Martha's voice, shrill and venomous, echoed from our second-floor balcony. She was there in her wheelchair, her face contorted in a terrifying rictus of rage. "You think you can just destroy this family and walk away?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You'll pay for this, Claire, you'll pay." I ignored her, focusing on the front door. I just wanted to get Emily's things and leave. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Martha, with surprising strength, had grabbed a heavy ceramic mug, one of her favorites, ironically, from a small table beside her. "You'll ruin everything, you hateful bitch!" she shrieked, and with a furious grunt, she hurled it downwards. Time seemed to slow. I saw the mug arc through the air, a deadly projectile. It was aimed at me, no doubt. I instinctively flinched, bracing for impact, but it sailed past my head. At that exact moment, Richard, having heard the commotion, had stormed out of the apartment building's main entrance onto the sidewalk below the balcony, his face a thundercloud. He looked up, his mouth open to shout, probably at Martha, possibly at me. The heavy ceramic mug connected with his temple with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground without a sound. A wave of absolute horror washed over me. I screamed, rushing forward. Martha from the balcony let out a piercing, animalistic wail. "Richard!" I knelt beside him. His eyes were open, vacant. Blood was pooling on the pristine sidewalk. Martha was screaming hysterically from above. "She killed him. Claire killed him. It's her fault. She drove him to this. She made me do it. No, she pushed him." Her accusations were wild, incoherent. My voice, when I found it, was shaking but clear, cutting through her hysteria as neighbors started to appear at their windows and doors. "No, Martha," I said, looking up at her, my face ashen. "I didn't touch him. You threw that mug. You did this." The cacophony of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer, a soundtrack to the horrific, unimaginable climax of my fight for freedom. My moment of triumph had curdled into a tragedy of Sophoclean proportions. Justice, in its cruelest, most twisted form, had arrived. The flashing lights of police cars and an ambulance painted grotesque, swirling patterns on the familiar facade of our apartment building. Paramedics worked on Richard, a grim, silent ballet of practiced urgency, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it was too late. The vibrant, often infuriating man who had been my husband was gone. The police separated me and Martha immediately. I gave my statement in the back of a squad car, the words coming out in a flat, numb monotone. I recounted Martha's rage, the argument, the thrown mug. I saw them speaking to a few neighbors who had witnessed Martha's tirade from the balcony and the horrifying moment of impact. Emily blessedly had been inside, likely with a very shaken babysitter Richard must have hastily arranged after I left her at his office. She hadn't seen the worst of it. Martha's story, as I later pieced together from the periphery of the investigation, was a chaotic jumble of accusations against me, claims of an accident, and moments of genuine hysterical grief. She provoked me. She was trying to destroy my son, take everything it slipped. I didn't mean for it to hit him. Her words were a torrent of self-preservation and bewildered anguish. In the end, due to Martha's age, her physical condition, her obvious distress, and the lack of clear premeditation to harm Richard, specifically, no criminal charges were filed against her. Tragic accident. The papers would later call it a domestic dispute, gone horrifically wrong. For me, it was a bitter pill. Justice felt incomplete, smeared with the awfulness of the event, yet a part of me understood the legal complexities. Proving intent for murder or even manslaughter against an elderly, wheelchair-bound woman who was ostensibly aiming at someone else would have been a fraught legal battle. The system opted for the path of least resistance. The days that followed were a surreal nightmare. Richard's funeral was a strained, somber affair. His side of the family, a collection of distant cousins, and a stern-faced aunt, looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Martha was there, a crumpled, weeping figure in her wheelchair, attended by a hired nurse. She refused to look at me, her grief a palpable wall between us. My own grief was a strange, complicated thing. A a sorrow for the man I had once loved, for the life we had failed to build, tangled with the shock of my newfound, horrifically gained freedom. Emily. Poor child clung to me, her small face etched with a confusion and sadness that broke my heart anew each time I looked at her. I focused all my energy on shielding her, on being her rock. Then came the lawyers, the reading of Richard's will. He hadn't updated it since early in our marriage. As his widow, I was the primary beneficiary of his personal assets, and Emily was well provided for through various trusts. The apartment, which was in his name, was now part of his estate to be managed according to the will's terms, which essentially meant it would pass to me. The irony was not lost on me. The financial independence I had craved had arrived, stained with blood and tragedy. One of Richard's cousins, a quiet woman named Susan, whom I'd met only a handful of times, approached me after the will reading. "Claire," she said, her voice gentle, "I know Richard could be difficult, and Martha," she shook her head, "I never understood why he let things get so bad for you. If you need anything at all, please call me." Her unexpected kindness was a small balm on a raw wound. The most pressing issue was my living situation. I couldn't stay in that apartment haunted by Richard's death and Martha's presence. The memories were too toxic. Fortunately, the staffing agency called. One of the live-in caregiver positions I'd interviewed for was offered to me, caring for an elderly gentleman whose family lived abroad. It was in a quiet town miles away. It offered a good salary, separate accommodation for myself and Emily, and a chance to breathe. I accepted immediately. Telling Martha I was leaving and taking Emily was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, second only to witnessing Richard's death. I found her in the living room, staring blankly at a television screen. "Martha," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "Emily and I will be moving out at the end of the week. I've taken a job in another town." Her head snapped up, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow, fixed on me with a flicker of their old fire. "You're abandoning me after everything. You'll need to make arrangements for your own care, Martha," I said, ignoring the bait. "Richard's estate can cover the costs, or you can call your nephew Troy. I'm sure he'd be willing to help." Her face crumpled. For a moment, I saw not the vindictive tyrant, but a broken, frightened old woman. But it was quickly replaced by bitterness. "You did this," she whispered. "You took my son, and now you're taking my granddaughter. You'll get what's coming to you, Claire. You mark my words." I didn't argue. I simply stated, "I'm doing what's best for Emily and for myself. We need peace, Martha, something we never had here." Packing our belongings felt like shedding a skin. Each item I folded, each memory I boxed up was a step away from the suffocating life I had endured. As I set the boundaries first with the police, then with Richard's family, and finally with Martha, I felt a new strength solidify within me. It wasn't triumph, not in the way I'd envisioned during my invoice speech, but it was a profound, resolute reclaiming of my life and my daughter's future. The victory was quiet, somber, but undeniably real. We were leaving the wreckage behind. 2 years passed. 2 years of quiet healing, steady work, and the slow, gentle rebuilding of our lives. My new position as a live-in caregiver for Mr. Henderson, a kind retired professor with a mischievous sense of humor and a deep love for literature, was a world away from the oppressive atmosphere of my old home. He treated me with respect, valued my companionship and care, and adored Emily, who blossomed in the calm, stable environment of our small cottage on his property. I excelled in my role. The skills I'd honed under duress with Martha, patience, meticulous attention to medical needs, and ability to manage a household efficiently, were now appreciated and professionally compensated. I saved diligently, invested wisely. My dormant marketing brain found new life in personal finance, and slowly the financial security I'd once only dreamed of became a reality. Emily thrived in her new school, made friends easily, and the shadows that had haunted her eyes began to recede. We took walks in the nearby woods, read books together by the fire in winter, and slowly, painstakingly, built a new definition of family, one based on love, mutual respect, and peace. News of Martha trickled in occasionally, usually via Richard's cousin Susan, with whom I'd maintained a tentative but kind correspondence. After my departure, Martha had indeed called her nephew Troy. Desperate and alone, she had persuaded him to move in and care for her, promising him the apartment, our old apartment, upon her death. Troy, a man perpetually down on his luck, had agreed, likely envisioning a future inheritance that would solve his financial woes. Karma, however, had other plans. Martha, it seemed, had not softened with age or tragedy. If anything, her bitterness had concentrated. She treated Troy, by all accounts, even more abysmally than she had treated me. Susan recounted tales of his constant stress, his frayed nerves, Martha's relentless demands, and verbal abuse. The cycle of misery continued just with a new caregiver. Then, about 18 months after Richard's death, Martha executed her final spiteful masterpiece. Whether it was a twisted attempt to control things from beyond the grave, a moment of senile sentimentality towards Emily, or simply a final act of malice designed to thwart Troy's expectations, we'll never truly know. She changed her will, bypassing Troy entirely, and left the apartment, the sole, significant asset remaining in her name after Richard's estate was settled, to her granddaughter Emily. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep a few months later. Troy, upon discovering the change in the will, was incandescent with rage and disbelief. He'd endured nearly 2 years of her tyranny, banking on that inheritance. He launched a legal challenge attempting to contest the will, claiming undue influence or diminished capacity on Martha's part. But Martha, ever cunning, had ensured the will was ironclad, witnessed by her lawyer and a doctor who testified to her soundness of mind at the time of signing. Troy's challenge failed spectacularly, leaving him with nothing but bitter memories and legal fees. Justice, in its own circuitous way, had delivered a 5-course meal of comeuppance. As Emily's legal guardian, the responsibility of the apartment fell to me. The thought of returning to that place, even to sell it, filled me with dread. But I hired a reputable estate agent in our old city, handled everything remotely, and the apartment sold quickly. The proceeds went into a secure trust for Emily's future education and well-being. It was a substantial sum, a final, unexpected legacy from a family that had caused so much pain, now transformed into a foundation for my daughter's dreams. With that final tie to our old life severed, Emily and I made one last move, this time to a vibrant coastal town even further away, a place of sunshine and sea breezes, a place where no ghosts lingered. I continued my caregiving career, finding fulfillment in helping others but on my own terms. Emily, now a bright, confident teenager, was excelling. Looking back, I reflected on the convoluted journey. The path to freedom had been paved with an unimaginable tragedy, a horror I would never fully forget. Richard's death was a profound loss, a life cut short in a moment of terrible, uncontrolled rage. Yet amidst the sorrow, I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. I had learned that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's valuation, but by my own. The quiet housewife had roared, and in the aftermath of the storm had found not just survival, but a deep, abiding peace. What goes around doesn't just come around. It multiplies sometimes in sorrow, sometimes in unexpected grace. My life with Emily was a testament to the latter. My story is a testament to the often unseen struggles within families and the earth-shattering power of finally claiming your own worth. The deepest moral, I believe, is that your value is inherent. It's not something to be earned through servitude or diminished by another's neglect or abuse. Financial independence for women isn't a luxury. It's a lifeline, a cornerstone of self-respect and safety. Abuse isn't always physical. Emotional and financial control can be just as insidious, just as damaging, slowly eroding your soul until you barely recognize yourself. And sometimes the most profound changes arise from the most unexpected, even tragic circumstances, forcing you to find a strength you never knew you had. Have you ever felt trapped in a situation where your contributions were invisible, your voice silenced? What was the moment that finally made you say enough? I truly want to know. If you've ever been the forgotten support system, the unpaid worker in your own life, or if you've had to fight for your basic right to respect and autonomy, drop a comment below and subscribe to this channel. Let's build a community where these stories are heard and validated. Share this story if you believe that true strength often lies in quiet resilience and that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Your story matters. Your worth is non-negotiable. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to hear more stories of triumph over adversity, of finding light after darkness. In the end, the truth didn't just set me free. It rebuilt me stronger piece by piece from the ashes of a life I was never meant to live. My invitation to you is to examine your own life, your own relationships. Are you being valued? Are you truly seen? Never underestimate the power of your own voice, your own worth. Claim it, nurture it, build the life you deserve, not the one others dictate for you. Join our community of strong survivors, and let's continue to share support and inspire one another. I'll be sharing more of my journey and the lessons learned along the way very soon. Thank you for listening.